Hey there, thanks for tuning in. I love sharing these iridology mini classes with you. If you like this video, do me a favor, would you, and click the like button. It helps YouTube to show it to other people who would also enjoy it. And remember to subscribe to the channel because then you get notified when I post something new. And leave a comment below. I would love to know what you've learned from watching this video. Alrighty, so let's dive in. So today we're looking at the history of iridology. This is an important topic. A lot of people think, history, bleh, boring stuff, why bother? But really, there is iridology has evolved. And a part of that evolution means moving forward, right? It means you start out with a thesis and you work with that and you either prove it or disprove it and you move on from there. And the challenge here is that there's been a lot of iridology theories over the years that have been disproven, but people glommed onto them as if they were gospel true. And that outdated information, that information that's been disproved, is still floating around out there. And there's some people that teach that stuff with absolute conviction, only it's bad information. So a part of the reason I'm doing this is to show you that evolution so you can see where some of that false information has come from, so that when you see it out there, you could push it aside and know that it's not valid. That makes sense? If that makes sense, give me a makes sense in the comments box. It's also important to remember that iridology is still evolving. There is still research going on. As a matter of fact, when I'm working with my students, I often tell them that my goal in teaching iridology is to give them such a solid foundation that they then are able to go on and do more research, right? And this is one of the reasons why I will only teach people who have an anatomy and physiology background, because if you don't have that, you can't go very deep. And I only want to work with people who are health professionals, because they are the ones who will take this further, and they're the ones who will continue to dispel myths and discover new things. And that's what we really want to know. So again, we need to keep moving forward. My own personal history with this: I've been in the wellness industry for over 4 decades. I started out as a lay-trained Jensenian iridologist and love Bernard Jensen. We'll be talking about him a little bit today. Discovered after 5 or 6 or 7 years that it wasn't really working. I had questions that my teachers, I had a few teachers in the community, they didn't have answers for. And they just kind of gave me pat answers or skirted the issue, and they never answered the question. And so I was about ready to walk away from iridology completely when I learned about this other kind of iridology called constitutional iridology. As I studied it, it made sense. They had answers for things that my Jensen teachers didn't have answers for. And where Jensen teachers would never admit, we don't have an answer for that, my constitutional iridologist would say, well, this is still developing. We don't know that yet. We should create a study. We can work to find that out, but we don't know it. And so I loved that they knew what they knew what they didn't know, and it was very different from constitutional. So I originally got into healing for my own health, as many of us do, right? Many of us do. I was a young adult having some health concerns, and the medical doctors didn't seem to be interested. They weren't really interested in narrowing it down. They were just interested in running more tests and more tests and more tests. And never along that series of a few months did they rule things out or rule things in. It was just more tests. And I finally got fed up and said, not playing your game anymore. That summer, I met a fellow who knew a little bit about iridology, a little bit about herbs, a little bit about nutrition. His mother was a lay-trained practitioner, and he taught me what he knew. I fell in love with him. We got married, and we are still married to this day, which is lots of fun. But that was my launching point. That was where I realized what I needed to do. I was in university to be a school teacher, and I realized that, yes, teaching is my calling, but not teaching children. I'm much better teaching adults. So that's how I got into holistic healing. In these 4 decades, I've worked with hundreds of clients, probably thousands by now. Some people keep track of everything. I don't. I'm not that kind of a girl. And I've developed many courses and taught them and have written and self-published many books. They're all out of print right now. They're all due for a rewrite because since the last publication, I've learned of each of these, I've learned a lot. And I would be embarrassed now to put those books out because it all needs updating. So books that I've written: Pregnancy Naturally, The Herbal Birth Kit Handbook, Healthy Kids Naturally, The Essential Guide to Nature Sunshine Products, Biokinesiology and Color Therapy Level 1 and Level 2. And the only one that is still available, but it's only available to my students, is the Confident Nutritionist Dynamic Iridology textbook. I've also created courses to go with most of those. I've taught an introductory 20-hour practical use of herbs course, a more advanced 16-hour herbal combinations course. I've also taught biokinesiology and color therapy. For a few years, I was a certified prenatal educator. I do love working with fertility and pregnancy, so I was teaching antenatal classes then. And currently, my big love is teaching dynamic iridology, which is the iridology course I've developed based on constitutional iridology. And it's a course that meets all of the requirements for curriculum that the International Iridology Practitioners Association requires to prepare students for certification. So if you'll stay with me to the end of the workshop today, I have an invitation for you, and I'll give you a little more information about the course. So I'm also, just so you know, I've got nutrition training from a Canadian nutrition school. So I'm a member of the Canadian Association of Holistic Nutrition Professionals and the Canadian Association of Natural Nutrition Practitioners. And I'm also a master herbalist, so I'm a professional member of the Alberta Herbalist Association. I really strongly believe that in order to be a good iridologist, we need to have modalities. So I know we've got an acupuncturist with us. We've got functional medicine people with us. This is brilliant because iridology is an assessment tool, not a diagnostic tool. And when you assess, you need to be able to create protocols. Does that make sense? If that makes sense, give me a yes in the comments. Let me know that it makes sense that when you assess something, you need to have an idea of what you're going to do, what you're going to recommend to your client. Yeah? Yeah, Trina, thanks. And Brenda, yeah, thanks. Appreciate that. Love it when you're playing with me in my sandbox. Thank you, Christina. Yeah. A lot of people think they can just learn iridology. I've had people actually book little 15-minute private coaching sessions to talk about learning iridology, and they only want to learn iridology. And it's like, well, that's not very helpful. That's like taking your car to the mechanic. The mechanic says, I know exactly what's wrong with your car, but I don't fix cars. You're going to have to take it to Joe down the street. He fixes. I assess, he fixes. And would you do that? Not likely, right? People don't want to do that with their health either. So let's talk about the history of iridology. It is rooted in ancient cultures. So many of the good things are, right? That doesn't mean that modern developments are not useful or valid or beneficial. It just means that often the roots were a long, long time ago. And we know that, for example, there are roots of iridology from Egypt, India, China, and Greece. And think about how science evolves with this. We once thought the earth was flat. We now know differently, right? Some people still believe the earth is flat. They have failed to keep up with research. And it's true that all good sciences evolve. In just about every field of science, what was once embraced as truth has given way to research and new discoveries, right? And good science will continue to do this. Good scientists will always continue to drive every science forward. And that is our job as health practitioners, is to drive the sciences that we are involved with forward and to build on strong foundations from the past, but to let go of things that don't work. So let's look at iridology. How many of you have heard the owl story? If you've heard the owl story, give me the word owl in the comments box. If you heard the owl story. just in case you haven't, and while we're letting those messages come in, story goes that there was a little boy in Budapest, Hungary. His name was Ignaz von Petschle, and he was 11 years old. The story gets muddy after that. Did he trap, catch, or find a bird of prey? Was it an owl or a hawk? And when he came into possession of this bird, did it have a broken wing or a broken leg? Did the break happen during the capturing process? There's a lot of muddiness here, but it goes back to a bird of prey had a broken limb of some kind. This 11-year-old boy was able to get his hands on this bird to take it home. And what he says he noticed was a black line in the bird's iris, and that as he nursed this wild bird back to health, the line disappeared. Now, there are some gaps in this story and some flaws, some logical flaws in this story. First off, animal eyes, and especially bird eyes, are very different from human eyes in structure. We have a fibrous stroma on the surface of our iris, just underneath the anterior border layer. Birds do not. Birds do not have that. They have a very smooth posterior leaf. And so in order for that split to have shown up, there would have to literally been a split in the bird's iris. Okay. Now, that means that we can't extrapolate necessarily from a bird to a human because our iris structures are very different. The other thing that I have to wonder, there are so many wild bird sanctuaries and wild animal sanctuaries where injured animals are taken to have them nursed back to health and rehabilitated. Don't you think that someone since the 1800s in one of these animal sanctuaries would have noticed the same thing? It can't have happened just once in the world's lifetime, right? And so it makes me think, what did Ignaz actually see? Now, really, while we're discrediting the story, I want to actually come back and give big kudos to Ignaz von Petschle, because whatever he saw, whatever he thought he saw, was enough to spur him on, and he became a medical doctor, and he began diagramming out his patients' eyes using colored charcoals and writing out their health histories and compiling, well, all these people had stomach issues. They all have something similar. It looks like in this one area of the eye, that must be the area that teaches us about stomach. So it spurred him on to do research in a very manually laborious way, right? So now we would correlate that all on a computer and program it in, and it would sort through and filter. They didn't have that back then. So kudos to Ignaz for being curious enough to start doing research and to create one of the first iridology. Actually, I think he created the very first iridology map. He figured out where some of the key organs are in the eyes. But his relative, he had a relative in here that said that it was recognized that Ignaz was looking at an owl's eye, not that of a human. He did not have the proper equipment to prove what had been recorded in the stories. It's time for iridology to move forward based on sound research rather than hearsay. And that's a quote from Ellen Tart Jensen. But again, he did become a medical doctor, and he was using a 2-power magnifying glass. I prefer at least an 8-power, or better yet, my 24-megapixel camera, right? He was doing this with a very weak magnifying glass, and he started creating these maps, just absolutely amazing. But he couldn't understand why some people would have a mark in a particular area and have symptoms. Other people would have a mark in the same area and not have symptoms. So that was one of the things that tripped him up. Thanks to his research, what we now know is that most of what we see in an iris, like easily 95% of what we see in an iris, is genetic, right? So it shows us genetic potential, genetic predispositions, not current health problems, right? Current health problems would be diagnostic. Genetic predispositions shows us exactly that, predisposition. So it's an assessment tool. Pastor Nils Liljeqvist from Stockholm, Sweden, Okay, so he was overlapping the time that von Petschle was researching. He correctly identified that the density of the fiber in an eye, and this fiber that we're looking at here is what an owl and a bird and most animals don't have. But Nils recognized that the fiber density correlates to constitutional resiliency. So what does that mean? It means that the tighter the fiber, the more fiber we have per square inch, the more able this body is genetically to withstand disease, to ward off breakdown, and to recover after a negative incident. When we have a looser weave, like we see here, where we've got gaps in between things, this person will have a lower resistance. They are going to need to be more vigilant with their nutrition and their lifestyle, and be more self-aware of what's going on so they can get in there and work to support areas that need it on an ongoing basis. So this is a more resilient constitution. This is a less resilient constitution. And when we understand that, it gives us an insight as to how we need to work with these people. I tell all my clients 3 months to lay a foundation and a month for every year you have the problem. So they're not expecting an overnight miracle, right? These people will send me an email within the first week saying, I feel so much better, because they respond quickly. Their body has more resilience, more ability to improve when it's given the right building blocks. These people will take the full 3 months to lay a foundation and 1 month for every 1 month for every year they've had the problem, because their bodies are less able to respond. They respond at a slower level. So that was what Nils Liljeqvist offered into the world. We now understand that, or rather, Nils also said that he felt that the eyes would change due to toxic exposure, like exposure to heavy metals or exposure to medications. But we now understand that these kinds of pigments, and even this yellow flush that's in here, or this little teeny yellowish haze that's in here, these are not toxic. We understand now that these are melanin, and that they are not the result of toxic exposure. They are determined again by genetics. The eye accumulates these, and that's not as a result of exposure, it's a result of epigenetic cueing, but the eye will not disperse these. In my 40 years of working with people and putting people through the paces on some pretty heavy duty programs, I've never seen a pigment disappear, but I certainly have documentation of pigment building over time. Emmanuel Falca, again in Germany, notice how so much of this is based in that Central European area. He started mapping out the iris as well. And he also started laying the foundation for defining constitutions. So we would call them lymphatic, biliary, hematogenic. He went a little bit deeper than that, which may or may not be necessary depending on what you're doing. He taught iridology, and there's actually an institute in Germany named after him. It's called the Falca Institute. Interesting that in Germany and in Russia, you have to be a medical doctor, or in Germany, you could be a Heilpraktiker to practice iridology. I would not be allowed to practice iridology in Germany because I'm neither a Heilpraktiker nor a medical doctor. So iridology is recognized by the medical professions in those European countries. Rudolf Schnabel, he did more research into pigment. So what do the different colors of pigment mean? And into pupil tonus. So by pupil tonus, we mean the size of the pupil and the shape of the pupil, because those are very dynamic indicators that give us, and they're not iris, right? Pupil is not iris. It's kind of sort of the edge of the iris, perhaps, but this is giving us more of a dynamic indication of things that are current in the body. And when we understand what's current in the body, we then understand protocols. We can create protocols for the client to help them resolve that. Schnabel was one of the first to use a microscope to examine the iris. He also said this, and I really appreciate this from him. He said, it was no easy task, and those who believe or would like to believe that handling iridoscopy, which we now call iridology, can be learned in a few weeks or even days are mistaken and do a disservice to a good cause. You will see out there, even now, there are a lot of people who will teach a 10 or a 12-hour course in iridology, and then they'll issue a certificate calling you a certified iridologist. And I will tell you, you've barely scratched the surface. That is not enough to be certified on. You've got a hobby there, maybe a party game level, but you don't have training that will let you function at a professional level. That isn't meant to sound harsh. I've had a lot of people say, well, there's this course over here that's only, $75 for the weekend. I'm going to do it and get certified. And I'm going, if you think you're getting certified with good information on $75, I want you to think again. Would you go to a doctor who got his training for $150? Probably not likely, right? Joseph Ungerer. I just love his picture. I wish I'd had the pleasure of meeting him. He looks like I want to adopt him as my grandfather. Seriously, he was a student of Schnabel's. He became a naturopath, and he was concerned that everybody who was doing research seemed to have their own language, their own words. And you couldn't have two iridologists talking to each other because they wouldn't understand each other. They had different ways of describing what they saw in the eyes. He wanted to unify the language. He knew that students were reading books and accepting printed word about iridology before adequate research was completed. So he refused to publish his work until it had been analyzed and reviewed by his professional peers. Now, we've had that problem in my lifetime of people publishing books on iridology that were deceptive, would be the best way to put it. I'm thinking of one in particular that she published her book, and it came out later that she admitted that the before and after photos were not legitimate. They'd used color filters to create the appearance of change in the eyes. And in some case, they had literally swapped out different people's eyes. So person A, person B as before and after. And so I agree with Joseph that we need a higher standard of vetting information that is released and that is published. Joseph Deck. We're going to talk a little bit more about Joseph Deck in a few minutes. He was a dedicated iridology researcher. He pioneered iridology and iridology photography, and he was an instructor. Doesn't he look like Cary Grant? He looks like he should be a movie star from the 50s. Theodor Krieger was a student of Ungerer, Deck, and Schnabel. So he'd studied with three of our founders, and he felt that iridology was the number one assessment tool, but that it should be used with other assessment tools, that we should be triangulating what we're seeing with other ways of gathering information. So he suggested things like a urine analysis, hand analysis, fingernail analysis, tongue analysis, feces analysis. So any of you who've got traditional Chinese medicine under your belt with facial diagnosis or facial analysis and tongue analysis and pulse analysis, that will all mesh beautifully with iridology. And you can use iridology and sclerology, which we do touch on, to help you confirm and narrow down and to direct what you want to do with your clients. He said in 1962, I hope the later generation will succeed in establishing a single uniform system. In spite of zealous efforts, these have so far not succeeded. So that is a concern, right? That it's not unified. And you see that if you're on social media, all kinds of opinions out there. The American roots of iridology, Dr. Bernard Jensen. We love Dr. Jensen. He's the founder of Jensenian iridology. He very single-handedly kept iridology alive during the Cold War. He learned about iridology before communications between Germany, Russia, and North America got locked down. And he took that information, which was really in its infancy still, and he worked with it as best he could. And because he did, he kept iridology alive. But as he got older, and Harry Wolff and Bill Cardona came on the scene. Harry Wolff was an American-born German. He got a hold of one of Joseph Deck's books on iridology, written in German, and he started studying it. And he started traveling around teaching what he learned. Bill Cardona connected with him, and they started teaching together. They, toward the end of Bernard Jensen's life, Harry and Bill hosted an iridology symposium and invited Dr. Jensen and gave him an award for a lifetime achievement of what he had contributed to iridology. And Bernard was so enthralled with the things that Harry and Bill were teaching in that symposium, that they were things that were different than Bernard had ever heard before. And he commended Harry and Bill and said, keep going. You're going in the right direction. Keep developing this science. And so that was exciting, that he admitted he didn't know everything and that it needed to keep moving forward. So we love Bernard for that. I hear he was a fabulous person. Again, I never had the opportunity to meet him. I am in contact with Harry, and Bill Cardona was my constitutional instructor. So very cool. Modernly, we have 3 basic styles of iridology that are recognized, that are out there. Jensenian, which is very common, and we're going to talk about each of these a bit individually. Rayid, which is the emotional, and constitutional. So when we look at Jensenian, it was originally taught and promoted by Bernard Jensen. He taught that the iris changes when the body changes. He taught that healing lines and lacuna shape and size will also change, that you could put new fiber structure into the eye, that lacunae would get smaller, that lacuna shading would lighten up. He taught that you could do an iris analysis without even talking to your client. Just look at their eyes, tell them what you see. That'll tell you what's wrong. Create your program from there. And I know was an iridologist, a well-known healer here in Calgary many years ago. You would book your appointment. You would go and sit down. He would shush you if you tried to say anything. He would look at your eyes. He would write out a list of what you needed. And 20 minutes later, you were paying at the front desk and buying your supplements, and you had no idea what was going on because he was just telling you what was going on. There was no conversation. And that's what a cold reading is. Traditional Jensenian iridologists have a very different style from modern Jensenians because Ellen Tart Jensen, who we saw a quote from earlier, and who is Bernard Jensen's daughter-in-law, started connecting with Bernard over 4 decades ago. Well, about 4 decades ago, about the same time I got into this. And she studied with him. And since Bernard's passing, she has updated things like his iridology chart. And even she's written a book. She's done many things to update and bring everything that she teaches under the Jensen banner in line with what we now know about constitutional. Rayid iridology. For those of you who are interested in the mental, emotional, personality side, that would be Rayid. Sometimes it's called emotional, sometimes it's called behavioral. This teaches that emotional traits are genetic and are revealed by markings in the irides. Very interesting, right? Readings can be done cold, but information gathered from the irides can also be combined with multi-generations. So if you can get like photos of grandparents' eyes, parents' eyes, children's eyes, you'll see how markings are passed down, and that works for physical iridology, for constitutional, but it also works for doing the emotional. Christina is asking, can you do quality reading on the computer? So Christina, I think what you're asking is, can you do a remote analysis? Am I correct in interpreting your question? If I am, let me know with the word correct. Yes, okay, excellent. No, you cannot. From the perspective of, you have to be able to get good photos or see the person's eyes. So I've got a fairly good camera on my computer. It's an external camera. If I come close and try to do a Halloween face, you cannot see the details of my eyes clearly because that camera is not designed to keep a rounded surface in focus close up. And so what you really need is you can get decent photos with a smartphone when you know what you're doing, or with a proper iridology camera. So a good camera body with the right kind of lens and the right lighting system on the front, you can get amazing eye photos, and we'll look at some of those in a minute. And so I really prefer to work off photos. Although I teach my students, and where all my students start is we start with the lighted magnifier and we start just doing face-to-face. Okay. But again, once I've got those photos, they're good for at least a year, because I also look at the sclera. And again, I'm looking for pigment development in the irides. So I like to reshoot photos every year if I can. But if I can't, I work with what I've got. So again, back to RAID. We can do readings cold because we're assessing personality, and it's not just personality, but it's gifts and lessons is what we're really looking at. What are the strengths and what are the things that this person needs to learn? Founded by Denny Johnson, continued by Jim Burgess, and that is continuing to be developed. Where Denny started 30 years ago, he's in a totally different place with it now, and it's really fascinating to watch how he has even evolved his research. Constitutional originated with all of the men that we've seen earlier, including Joseph Deck. It's used by MDs in Italy, Germany, and Russia, so it's medically validated. Correlative medical studies are currently being done. There is more research going on right now that is giving us fabulous leaps forward. And it teaches that the eyes are a reflection, the irides specifically, are a reflection of the genetic structure of the body. The sclera is very dynamic, it changes. The iris is genetically cued. And constitutional is the foundation of the dynamic iridology program that I have created. So constitutional teaches us that iridology does not give us answers, it tells us what questions to ask. So we always, as the last point here says, we always want to have a conversation with our client. My first question is always, what would you like my help with? I get their shopping list of what they need help with, get a little more history. I want to know, do they have any medical diagnoses? Not that I'm going to put a lot of weight on that, but I want to know what they know from the doctor, right? I want to know, are they on any medications? Have they had any surgeries? And is there a family history of anything? Then I'm going to take photos of their eyes, pop those up on my large computer screens, and I'm going to look at those eyes to see what information they give me about how this body works in relation to the concerns my client has brought in. And in that first appointment, I'm going to laser focus on what my client wants help with. I need to help them get results there before I can go deeper. Does that make sense? Our clients have to feel heard, and then we can take them deeper. If we totally sidestep what our clients were concerned about and go off on our own tangent based on what we see in the eyes, our clients are not going to come back. They don't want to feel not heard. They already feel not heard by the medical world, which is why they're coming to us, right? Other iris and sclera changes may continue to become visible with time, revealing areas that need support. So this is all constitutional, and it's what we teach in dynamic iridology. All right, so let's have a look at this eye. I started learning iridology in 1979, and constitutional iridology was not yet a thing here in Canada. It was in its infancy in the US. So I studied and embraced the work of Dr. Bernard Jensen. And again, like I said, after about 5 or 6 years, I started to get frustrated. Here's why. I would see an eye like this, and I'd been taught that every one of these closed shapes in here, they were called lesions in that model, was a pathological problem that was happening right now. Every one of these things needed to be addressed now. And as I would go over the map of the iris, and I would say, well, you've got this. No, I don't. You've got this problem. 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 Yeah, I've got that one, right? It was really frustrating for both me and the client. Like 90% of the time, that individual assessment of a marking was incorrect. That is the level you will learn iridology at a weekend seminar. Okay. I was also taught that these lines that were inside this shape had been laid down in this person's life as their body was healing things. We now know that is entirely not correct. I was also taught we could get rid of these shapes if we did the right diet, the right cleansing, the right supplements, the right exercises, the right lifestyle. If we got all our ducks in a row, all of these would disappear. Now, I never saw that happen, not once. In constitutional, we know that these are inherited and inherited from 3 to 4 generations back, right? So we want to ask, is there a family history? We know that these are not going to go away, that if this person works really hard on these things before they have children, they may pass on, hopefully will pass on a stronger genetic constitution to their children. But these will, and these might start to be a little reduced. We might see less shading inside, but it will likely take 3 to 4 or 5 generations for these to be reversed, if indeed we can do that. So when I see these kinds of markings, they're not going to change. We're not going to use the iris to tell us this client is making progress, because the iris is not going to tell us that. What's going to tell us they're on progress, on track and making progress, is how they feel. And that is so much more important, right? So when I see someone that has this many lacunae, we call these lacunae, and they are just, that just means an open space. We want to find out what they're currently doing in their diet and their lifestyle. And if they're doing things that are appropriate for those lacunae, then we encourage them on. Good job. Let's build on that foundation. When we see these lacunae like this in an eye, chances are they might need support with hormones, with hormone balance, with getting the endocrine system in check. They might have challenges with their blood sugars. We don't know which direction to take it unless we have a conversation with them, right? And so and as we make those recommendations and they follow through with their homework, we begin to see the changes. Women that have had menstrual issues, those issues settle down. People that have had blood sugar disorders, that calms down. We see it in their medical lab work as well. For example, if they came in with an elevated hemoglobin A1C, we will see that begin to correct, right? And so we have lots of ways of gauging whether we're on the right track or not, but it's not in the iris itself. An eye like this in my Jensenian training was highly toxic. This person needed to be cleansed. Oh my goodness, they were so full of everything that was awful. How could you do this to yourself? Right? And when we looked at things like this, it was like, oh my goodness, we're going to need, like, I don't know how many cleanses to get this done. But, you know, the thing is, we would do the cleanses and this wouldn't change. This is their genetic gift. The fact that their eye looks like this tells us where their genetic strengths and weaknesses are. So in an eye like this, we know first and foremost, they are likely to have, be at risk of digestive issues stemming from liver insufficiencies. And this person in particular might also have a little bit of a kidney tendency where they might not clear uric acid well enough. And that, of course, would lead to inflammation. And so what can we do with that? Well, we can certainly support the digestion. We can certainly support the liver through foods and supplements and lifestyle and even how they think, right? And we can support the kidneys again with diet, with lifestyle, with supplements, all kinds of things. And so we always, when we're working with a client, we need that information. We need to ask them, what is your diet like? What is your lifestyle like? Where does your stress come from? How do you handle stress? How does stress feel in your body? Right? And as we gather that information and correlate it with what we see in an eye like this, we are better able to create a program that will help to laser in. So, for example, this person also burns through B vitamins, vitamin C, calcium, and magnesium at record speed. And they tend to live in the sympathetic zone. So they're always on edge waiting for the next bomb to go off. So we need to work with their nervous system as well, because as you already know, if they are always in the sympathetic mode, they won't be able to digest. This person doesn't have the strongest, most resilient digestive tract. So if that digestion is being impacted by the nervous system, they're going to digest even more poorly. Does that make sense? If that makes sense, give me a makes sense in the comments box. Right, so with a client with an eye like this, I'm going to start with doing a tandem approach. I'm going to support the nervous system, and I'm going to support the digestive tract, right? And as I do both of those things, we're going to see this person go, and the digestion will improve because we've addressed it on 2 levels, by feeding in probably some enzymes and by relaxing the nervous system some, right? You could do just digestive enzymes and it would have an impact. You could do just a nervous system approach and it would have an impact. But when we see that we need both of these together, we have a bigger impact. What are we looking at? Color, lines, both. We're looking at both. The color, the placement of the color gives us information, and the placement of the lines coming around here teach us about the nervous system. Okay, and this is exactly where a deeper course in iridology takes you. Is how do we understand how the markings work together? Well, we can only understand that if we understand anatomy and physiology, right? In old iridology, again, every one of these lacunae would have been a lesion, or sorry, would have been a pathological problem happening right now. When I learned constitutional iridology and decided to give it a chance, it was just amazing. I actually started learning from a set of VHS videotapes. I'd been teaching at a conference way up in northern Alberta, and somebody there was presenting a workshop on iridology. I thought, well, I'll attend that one for sure. And they showed an iridology map that I'd never seen before. So I made a note of the information on the map, who the contact was, how to reach them. When I came back to my office a few days later, a publication that I wrote for at that time had an article in the back page about iridology, and it had the very same contact information on it. I do not think that was by accident. So I reached out to that contact, ordered their VHS videotapes, which again, surface level, constitutional, study those backwards, forwards, upside down, inside out. And it just made so much sense, so much sense. And then I brought Bill Cardona to Canada twice to teach certification level classes. So we know then that these markings are inherited. They show us where the types of weakness, they show us where inherited weaknesses are in the body. Pigment are not an accumulation of toxins. They again show us inherent predispositions. The color tells us which organ wants to be out of balance. The placement of the pigment tells us which organ is going to suffer most from that. And so we may see symptoms with the organ of origin. We may see symptoms with the organ of destination. And we may need to actually do things for both of those organs. We are not going to cleanse this out, but we can certainly reduce its impact by simply doing the right things for both organs. Constitutional iridologist teaches us to look for patterns and to understand the interrelationship of organs. And if that person's already doing things that were supporting the good health in those areas, there may be no symptoms. We may look at an eye and go, oh my goodness, you are very much at risk for lung things. And this person is already doing things like they don't smoke. They don't live or work in a polluted environment. They don't do dairy products or white flour. They have an exercise program that includes a lot of deep breathing. When they have a grief episode or a grief incident, they have support in place to work it through so that grief doesn't settle into the lungs, right? In which case, this, I don't need to worry about it. They're already on track. We know this is a weak link. And we know that if this person stops taking care of their lungs, this could easily lead them into a pathological situation. Does that make sense? Does that fit? If that fits, give me that fits in the comments. So again, this person might have issues with connective tissue. There's lots of indications in here that this person might have connective tissue issues. The kidneys in this person might not like keeping up with what they're supposed to do. We see indications of liver. We see indications of lymphatic system. So we need to know then, ask them, what are your symptoms? And their shopping list will often be their symptoms. They think their symptoms are the problem, but their symptoms are just the symptoms. The symptoms are just the messenger, right? So then we need to know about diet and lifestyle and supplements. We need to know, what is their goal with this? What do they really want to achieve? Some people say they want to achieve health, but they're not willing to do the work, right? They want someone to wave the magic wand and tap them on the head and, ooh, we're all better, right? But they're not willing to do the work. So they really don't want health. It's a wish. It's not a goal. And so we need to understand all of those things about our client. So for this person, again, depending on what their symptoms are, I would probably do digestive support for sure. Because if the digestion is not up to snuff, it doesn't matter what else we do physically, they're not going to get the nutrients into those body parts. So I would probably do some digestive support. I would probably want them eating good quality protein so that they could break that down, and we can, from there, they can assimilate that. So Christine is asking, what are areas called again from genetic? I'm not clear on your question, Christina. What are areas called again? Are you meaning these loops? If you're meaning these loops, these are called lacunae. L-A-C-U-N-A is the singular, add an E on the end of that for the plural. These are lacunae, all right? And so again, with this person, I want her to do resistance training. I want her to stimulate her body to repair muscle tissue, especially because her connective tissue and her eyes are showing that her connective tissue in her body doesn't repair very well. So we need to do things to stimulate that. I want her to keep her water intake up because she's got indications here that her kidneys may not want to keep up. And the best way to do that is to drink an optimal amount of fluid. Again, digestive support, really important here. I probably want leafy greens. She's got some indications that liver doesn't want to do its job. Liver does over 500 different things. If it decides to be cranky, so many dominoes fall, right? And so we need to help that liver do its job better, and leafy greens are that. Where do I see a lack of water? I don't see a lack of water. I see that the kidneys may not want to clear uric acid very well. And so that goes back to two things. It goes back to digesting the proteins more cleanly and providing adequate fluid to dilute the acid, the uric acid that is created from the breakdown of proteins so the kidneys can pull it out. Okay, where do we see it? There's several markings. We've got kidney zone markings and we've got color markings. So kidney zone is down here, and we've got color markings all the way around here that suggest kidneys. Okay, so again, this is understanding anatomy and physiology, and it's understanding how things work together. Is this making sense? Sherry's saying, I love this. I'm so glad you do, Sherry. That's amazing. In Jensenian iridology, they would have said, this person is stressed, they're headed for a nervous breakdown. We've got enough of these rings going around that says, oh my goodness, this person's going to explode any minute. Jensenian would have said this person is full of parasites. You need to do a parasite cleanse. When you do a parasite cleanse, these lines will disappear. None of that is true. Constitutional iridology, again, teaches us to look at the eye in context of the person. So this is the eye of an Asian woman. She's in her mid-30s. She came to me with the concern of fertility. She and her husband had been trying to conceive for 3 years with no success. So I noted, first off, that she has lots of contraction furrows. That tells me that she burns through her B vitamins, vitamin C, calcium, and magnesium very quickly. B vitamins are critical for many things, including liver function. I noted that she has a teeny tiny, very dark pigment right there. That made me suspect that she doesn't methylate her B vitamins very well, which means that she was using a standard over-the-counter prenatal vitamin that had folic acid in it and cyanocobalamin. Her body is probably not capable of methylating those to use them properly. So she also has, I'm going to tie all of this together. She's got this very bit of a cloud, a fog hanging over this just inside the edge of her iris, which suggests that her liver enzymes may be out of balance and may be messing with either how she takes carbs into cholesterol or how she takes carbs into blood sugar. And so that's telling me I might need to support her liver. So as we were in our first appointment together, and I'm looking at her eyes, and she and her husband are here, and they're saying they want to conceive, and I'm seeing these things in her eyes. I asked her if, number one, how long her menstrual cycles were. They were about 90 days. That's an infertile cycle, absolutely. And it points towards polycystic ovarian syndrome. So I asked her if her doctor had ever said that she had type 2 diabetes. There's enough indicators in here from this to this to these that can add up to type 2 diabetes and liver enzyme imbalance. And she said, oh yeah, my doctor says I am type 2 diagnosis or type 2 diabetes. And I said, well, have they also maybe suggested that you might have polycystic ovarian syndrome? Because again, these markings in a woman of reproductive age can all point that direction. There are other markings that I see in other people's eyes, in other women's eyes, that can give me the same story, but it's because I know how to connect the dots, right? And she said, oh yeah, they've also called it PCOS. Okay, now with that, because I understood that, I found out, well, what did the doctor say to do? Well, he said metformin and Clomid. That's not going to do anything here because they didn't give her any dietary advice. They actually didn't do anything to get her hormones balanced, to bring her cycles down. So we were able to do all of that with her. We got her from a 90-day cycle to about a 32 to 35-day cycle. We got her ovulating well. We got all of that done within about 6 months, which is nothing short of amazing. Her blood sugars became very stable and things were looking good. It took her another year of us tweaking her program literally every month. But after another year, she did get pregnant. So she worked with me for 18 months, got pregnant, had a beautiful baby boy in a 4-hour labor and delivery, right? Did not develop gestational diabetes either. So when we use constitutional iridology, it teaches us what questions to ask. It points us in the right direction, and it helps us create our programs. And it helps us do it very quickly. Rather than taking hours to assess an eye from top to bottom, we assess it based on what our client's needs are right now. So we can do an assessment in under 10 minutes. And when you know your modalities, you can create a program in 10 minutes or less and spend the rest of your time creating rapport with your client, teaching your client about the things that you want them to do, why it's important they do this, so that they have that, they can buy into, they can be really connected to what they need to be doing. So with this, what do I think the future of iridology is? Well, as long as we've got amazing research being done, and as long as iridology instructors are willing to move forward with new information as it comes available, I think iridology will continue to become a more and more powerful assessment tool. If, however, iridologists choose to hold on to old things that have been disproved, if they choose to hold on to shoddy research techniques, we are doomed. We are absolutely doomed. The choice is ours. We can either get and stay current and then help move things forward, or we can be the wrench in the engine that trips the whole thing up. So having said that, I'd like to take about 3 minutes to introduce you to the Dynamic Iridology Assessment System course. Would that be okay with you? If you would like to learn just a little bit, it's not a heavy duty sales pitch because we don't have a lot of time. If that's okay with you, give me an okay in the comments. We will just click to the next slide where you're saying okay. And yeah, we're saying, Sherry's saying yes. Perfect. So the dynamic iridology assessment system is the only live, online, fully mentored course for health professionals. And I define health professional as someone who has completed at least one college level anatomy and physiology course, because this is what we use to help them streamline their clinical work without sacrificing client care. And I might add, while enhancing client care, because it helps us to stop working overtime. How many of you see a client, gather information, go off and create their program on your own time? So many people I've worked with do that, and they spend like 2 or 3 or 4 hours of their own time that they're not really being paid for. And then they email the protocol out to their client. Yeah, that's not great. We want you to be able to create your programs in your client sessions, and to be able to do the assessment and the program creation in your session, because when you do that, you will stop overwhelming your client. When you take 2 or 3 or 4 hours to create a protocol and send that to your client, you are overwhelming them. You're giving them too much information, and they simply cannot be successful with that. Because your programs will become simple and succinct and precise, your clients will be able to do them better. They will get better success, and that will increase your long-term retention. I have many clients who've been with me now for 4 decades. They started with me in my Jensen days. Thank goodness they were patient with me. They are still with me now, right? And that's exciting. If you've already completed a college level anatomy and physiology course, and you've got a transcript with a grade on it, and I'm a stickler on that because that's a requirement from the International Iridology Practitioners Association for you to complete certification through them. Okay, that's not me being all stuck up. That's them saying this is a requirement. So if you've got that, then you are eligible to ask to join the next course. The next dynamic iridology course is starting on January 12th from noon till 2:15 Mountain Time. It is a live course. We meet once a week. We'll go over some details in just a moment. And so what we are doing in this course is not just teaching you the markings. We're integrating that with what you know about anatomy and physiology. How do the markings work together? How do we trace this back? How do they link? And we practice what questions do you ask? When you see this eye and you see this case study, what questions do you want to ask? And we also practice what are recommendations you would consider making in this setting, in this scenario, right? So we practice everything you need clinically as well, because you need that. Most teachers don't teach that. They just teach markings. Go figure it out on your own after that. I don't do that. I teach everything. So if you want more information, hop on to this URL, tinyurl.com/dynamic-iridology-insight, and let's have a Zoom conversation, and we'll talk about it. This isn't a sales call. This is to see if this is a good fit. If it's a good fit, I'll invite you to enroll. If it's not a good fit, I will help you see a different direction that you might be better off going in at this point in time. Remember, I've been at this for 4 decades. I do know a thing or two about the industry. One of my graduates said this. I asked her, how has this helped her in her business? She says, it's helped me to understand the relationships between different organs and organ systems more in depth. Iridology also gives me the advantage of seeing the potential for different genetic traits and qualities that may be underlying. By observing the constitution, for example, you can extrapolate how the person's body will likely respond to applications of healing methods. Therefore, it has helped me to expand my knowledge and increased efficiency at providing more precise recommendations for health-oriented options. I love that. Just one class? No, Christina. We're going to talk about what this is. So it starts on January 12th. It is 20 2.25 long live, 2.25 hour long live webinars. So we meet once a week for 20 weeks. It's 45 hours of training. Every class is recorded for playback on demand. And I do that because maybe you have to miss a class. How are you going to make it up? Or maybe you want to go back and review. There, we've got it. We have live group mentoring twice each month via webinar. So if you've got cases you would like help with, If you've got questions that you didn't ask in class, as you're practicing and you're studying and you've got more questions, you can certainly bring them into office hours and we can get those answered for you. This, again, we also talk about business development for those that you're just starting out. If you've got questions about business, bring them. This is student-led. You ask the questions, I give the answers. These sessions are open to you even after you've graduated. Right? So I've got students still coming to these, and they, like Karen that we just met on the previous slide, she still comes to them. She graduated and certified 5 years ago, right? We have a student and alumni MeWe group. So we have a private social media group on the MeWe platform. It's another place where you can ask questions, post cases, get group input. You also, as my gift to you, I've written the textbook, as I mentioned at the beginning, 225-page digital downloadable textbook. I kept it digital because occasionally IPA tweaks the curriculum. By keeping the book digital, I can update it and make the current edition available to all of my students, past or present. So you always have access to the latest information. We've also generated a 45-page digital study notes. We call them the cheat sheets. This is your quick reference guide. So once you've got this kind of under your belt and you just need a reminder of, I know what this sign is called, I just don't remember what questions to ask, or I don't remember what some of the better recommendations are to consider, that's all in your cheat sheets. I include IPA certification mentoring. So the course takes 5 months. Then for the next 10 months, I include whatever mentoring and support you need to prepare for IPA certification. But I do have that hard cutoff at 10 months. My experience has been that if students don't get on it and get it done, they don't get it done. And so I do cut you off at 10 months from support for certification. If you need an extension, you can purchase one. But I really push my students, if you want to certify, not all my students want to certify. That's okay. But if you want to certify, let's get it done within 10 months of your final class date. Again, the course starts on January 12th. It meets once a week for 2.25 hours for 20 weeks, plus the optional extra mentoring sessions that are at a different time and on a different day. And lots of support even after you have finished the course, finished the mentoring months. You are still invited to keep coming back to office hours. You're invited to keep hanging out with us on the MeWe platform. I don't know of any other teacher that offers so much support. I get requests frequently from students who have even certified through the IPA organization. So they've got the same training. No, they've had the same curriculum that I teach, but they're coming to me asking, will I mentor them? The answer is no. Your teacher should be mentoring you. I mentor my students for as many years ongoing as they need it. As long as I'm teaching, I'll be mentoring. All righty, so that gives you an outline of most of what's included in the course. There's certainly more features included that I've strategically planned to enhance your learning and to support you. Sherry is saying, have a lovely weekend. Her lunch is over. So glad you joined us, Sherry. I hope to talk to you soon. I know I'm speaking with some of you on Zoom calls later on today and in the coming week. Love that. If you have any questions, please reach out to me either through the Facebook group if you're there with me, or if you're interested in seeing if dynamic iridology is a good fit for you, let's have you book a Zoom call using that link you see on the screen, and let's have a chat. Thanks for watching this video. I would love to know what you learned from this, but I would also love it that if you learned something or if you enjoyed this video, share it with a friend, share it with somebody else who you know would also benefit from watching it. Thanks so much. We'll see you soon. Bye for now.